we started hosting this talk online, and we shifted it a bit. Usually we have this while eating, everyone's eating, so it's very informal. But for now, we have it while we're having our afternoon coffee, or in the case of our speaker, she will be having it with her morning coffee. Without further ado, I will introduce our speaker for today. She did her undergrad in University of the Philippines, Diliman on anthropology, but she also came from the Archaeological Studies program. She did a wonderful research on the archaeology of Bicol, and she produced a book about it. And the title is the Kabikulan in Archaeology, if I remember correctly. I can pull it up. And she is now working as a faculty of UP Mindanao, and she is currently doing her PhD in. She's a PhD candidate in Leiden University. She is studying Manobo tattooing and body modifications and its association with gender. While doing all of that, she is also a contributor to the Davao Sun. Am I correct, Aya?
Davao Today.
Davao Today. All right. So she's a regular contributor to the Davao Today, and she also wrote a lot of publications. Recently, I think she wrote the article, an ethnography on Pantaron Manobo tattooing, and she also co-wrote popularizing and advocating sago and other native plants as a chapter of a book. And she did a lot of other wonderful publications, but for today, I think she will be talking about something that is very close to her heart. And so please welcome Miss Andrea Malaya Ragragio. Welcome, Aya.
Hi, thank you, Anna. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'll be talking today about something that is, yeah, that's right, no, close to my heart, but at the same time, medyo fresh, no. It's something that I haven't really talked about in public before. But before I go into the actual talk, let me just start by acknowledging, no, and mentioning yung current na crisis na nangyayari ngayon sa mga lumad students tsaka sa kanilang mga elders doon sa Cebu City. As perhaps many of us have heard yung recent events just yesterday, no, sa Cebu. I would just like to say that yung ginagawa kong pag-aaral tsaka yung ginagawa naming pag-aaral with Myfel Paluga is part of yung effort sana namin in our way as anthropologists to give credence and to give value, no, sa mga experiences sa kasaysayan tsaka sa kultura ng mga kaibigan naming lumad, no. And the best way that we thought that we can do so as anthropologists is to really give weight doon sa kanilang mga sariling konsepto tsaka sa kanilang mga historical na pinagdaanan, no. Not just as palamuti, not just as metaphor, no. Sometimes kasi minsan ginagamit natin na parang metaphor lang, no, ang kultura ng mga katutubo. Pero as real concepts, no, as concepts that have sociological weight, that have sociological bearing, that can really affect how we do our own lives as well. So today's talk is going to be hopefully a successful effort in that direction. So I just wanted to put that out there. Sa simula pa lang. Okay, right. So to begin with, when Anna and Ara first asked me if I wanted to do a BINALOT talk, I was sure of two things. No, the first thing that I was sure of was, yes, of course I want to do one. Yay! And the second thing that I was sure of was that I wanted to, nabanggit ko kanina, no? I wanted to talk about something na hindi ko pa napuput out there, no? At least in a systematic manner, no? Pwedeng sa chikahan, ganun, pero hindi pa yung talagang parang presentation talaga, no? So, fresh na fresh, sabi nga, parang ako, alas 6 ng umaga, fresh na fresh, and therefore, I would be happy to hear yung thoughts and comments ninyo afterwards, no? Kasi medyo bago rin itong pag-present, no, nitong topic na ito. Okay, right. Okay, so though this talk is new, no? Okay, I'm going to read from now on para I don't get off track. From though this talk is new, parts of it came from a chapter that Michael and I contributed doon sa upcoming na Philippine reader that is being edited by our fellow archaeologist na si Stephen Acabado and organized by Stephen, along with Clem Camposano, no, that will hopefully come out this year. Okay, so yung chapter that we contributed was an exploration of the Manobo concept of panow, which encompasses Manobo ideas of mobility across space as they enact them in actual travels, and also in how they envision better futures and better worlds. Okay, so syempre, just like any study, in the course of making this chapter, I collected a bunch of literature about mobility. I guess yung mga research-oriented sa atin would know that, diba? You collect literature beforehand, right? And I came across a couple of articles from Peter Bellwood and James J. Fox about mobility in deeper time among Austronesian language speakers. Of course, I think most of us are already familiar, no, with Peter and his works. And on the other hand, si James Fox naman, yung expertise niya is in Indonesian ethnography, no? And his work overlaps and engages with several Dutch anthropologists from Leiden, where I'm located at the moment, no? Particularly doon sa pag-iisip ng Leiden structuralism. Anyway, so while I was reading Bellwood and Fox, I remember thinking na parang, hey, what they were saying weren't immediately resonating with what I saw in the field, and with the approach that we wanted to try out, no, in pag-usapin ng Manobo mobility. So for the moment, I set them aside and said to myself na I'll come back to them later na lang, no. And that time is now. Binalikan ko sila. Okay. So sabi ko, ay, go big and go home. Let's engage with these folks, right? Okay. So my talk today will be all about mobility, no, movement through space, how it is thought of and how it is enacted. From an archaeological point of view, marami na rin discuss na ng mobility, but more frequently seen through the lens of subsistence or adaptation or territoriality. Questions about movement of people tend to be answered in physicalist or mechanistic na mga answers, such as population growth and pressure, the transportability of agricultural technology, looking for resources, etc. Okay. Now, si Bellwood actually himself pointed out how what all these explanations for movement lack is what he called the essential component in the sphere of ideology. No? What does he mean by that? He means the ideas behind movement, motivations and intentions of people, no? What they think for themselves when they took that first step away from their settlements, or when they pushed off their canoe, no, or outrigger boats from shore. So we have to give props to Peter for raising this question of ideology intentionality, especially for a topic like the expansion of Austronesian speakers that is possible ideological components of movement. What he proposes is what he calls that a founder-focused ideology played a major, if not a decisive role in the expansion of early Austronesian speakers. Founder-focused ideology is a set of ideas or principles that treat ancestral figure founders of a particular group with deep respect and veneration. Note that these are not just any ancestors, no, but these were the ascribed actual originators of the group or clan or the descent lineage that one is a member of. In some cases, this reverence for kin group founders extended to deification, ginagawang parang supernatural figure. Clan groups can be named after them, and so being associated with this or that founder has implications about one's identity and interpersonal relations. In such an arrangement, the ranking of status positions by descent becomes a crucial factor in deriving social privileges. Yung mga privileges na yun can include socio-economic privileges like stewardship over land, rights to demand labor and services, and even polygynous marriages. But it also includes privileged purview into practices that further reinforce such an ideology, like ritual or safekeeping, secret knowledge, etc. Okay, how did founder-focused ideology translate into geographic mobility and the expansion of Austronesian speakers? This reverence for founder figures translates to the idea among early Austronesians that it is possible to follow in these founders' footsteps of moving away, exploring, and if successful, establish a settlement of one's own. This special feature of founder-focused ideology is what Bellwood calls founder rank enhancement, or a culturally sanctioned desire to found new settlements in order to become a revered or even deified founder ancestor in the genealogies of future generations. Among actors that would be most invested in engaging in founder rank enhancement were social juniors. Pwedeng yung mga younger na mga anak or younger sons, no, who may be passed over under rules of inheritance or primogeniture. According to Bellwood, founder rank enhancement would have become increasingly significant as Austronesian speakers pushed into new or previously uninhabited territory, particularly in the relatively smaller islands in the West, no, in Oceania. Expansion into such environs would have to have been intentional, no? Intentional if they were to be successful. So there's clear intentionality, planning, and even premeditation, and the potential for enhancement of one's kin and descendants could have been an ideological underpinning for these pioneering voyages. Okay. So sabi nga ni Bellwood na from a diachronic viewpoint, it is not difficult to see how continuous founder events, no, tuloy-tuloy na founder events, stacked one upon the other into the depths of Austronesian memory and enshrined in ritual chants would reinforce the worldly status of founders and their direct descendants. So yeah, establishing oneself as a founder had many advantages. No, among the potential advantages that Bellwood lists are you ensure the well-being of your descendants. Two, free access to resources, especially if you land on an unoccupied land. And three, the opportunity to more easily affirm and consolidate moral rights and claims, especially in the event that other people come along and try to stake their own claims. No? So kunwari, merong humabol at gusto rin nilang mag-establish ng sarili nila. No? Meron ka ng parang na-invest, no? Yung mga founders to stake their own claims. So basically, that's the summary of the founder-focused ideology model and the idea of founder rank enhancement. So ano yung mga possible gaps that we can push off of and add to the discussion of early and traditional mobility? First has to do with from where Bellwood derives yung founder-focused ideology, no, na concept mismo. And hence the possibility of acquiring founder rank. He cites ethnographic instances of exceptionally high regard for founding ancestors and accompanying clan or individual rankings in areas across the Austronesian world. But these are examples only from southern Indonesia and Oceania. So these are the only areas of Austronesia he references with regard to ethnographically recorded founder-related ranking systems. There seems to be, according to Bellwood, a general west to east gradients in the occurrence of ascribed ranking, no, sa mapa, as well as a similar gradient from the Philippines and the north to the Nusa Tenggara Islands to the south. No? So it's west to east, no, So sa west na portion, mas dun na pronounce yung ganitong founder ranking, no? Okay. Ay, sorry. Oh, tama. West to east, no? Yung occurrence ng ganung ranking. Tapos, yung ranking naman pala yung gradient is from south, sorry. Mali pala to. South to north, no? So, masa south ng borders ng Austronesian speakers yung makikita to. And then, kind of fading off to the north, to the Philippines. Yung kind of fading off to the north to the Philippines na to, Bellwood chalks it up to possible Islamic and Indic influences, no? So doon sa mga areas kung saan hindi na ito masyadong nakikita, posibleng na murky na siya ng Islamic and Indic influences, no? Pero it is precisely in these areas that I'm interested in, no? So sa bandang Pilipinas. Okay, so the second point, the second possible gap that we can push off of relates to an assumption that Bellwood advances at the start of his proposal, which is that some form of institutionalized inequality had existed among the early Austronesians on the basis of comparative linguistics. He specifically refers to the Proto-Austronesian Ruma as descent group and the Proto-Malayo-Polynesian Datu whose reflexes today mean high-ranking man or wealthy man, who is able to command the labor of others for self-aggrandizing activities. But that too, no, has four possible components that we can see here: political leader, priest or medical practitioner, aristocrat or noble, or ancestor or elder. With only number 3 as having the clear connotation of unequal rank, and rereading Blust's explication of Ruma will show that descent group does not immediately mean hierarchy. In fact, when reading it, I felt that our own term, no, in Filipino of kamag-anakan best captures the sense of Ruma. And we know that different kamag-anakans can exist without them necessarily subsuming one another. In terms of linguistic evidence, that are more definitive of ranking or hereditary ranking, those that Bellwood cites come from Proto-Oceanic languages. So again, we see the sort of tilting of evidence towards that particular area or that particular leg of the Austronesian expansion. Finally, as a model, we have to look at how the postulates flow from the first one to the next. I think that founder-focused thinking does not automatically translate to the imperative of founder rank enhancement. You can mark reverence or admiration for founding ancestors in ways that are not necessarily competitive or a matter of getting a head start. Okay, so I mentioned that founder-focused ideology basically derives from ethnographic and linguistic evidence of social organization. Yung sunod na framework, which is kay James Fox, maximizes these sources even more and has a broader comparative frame across the Austronesian-speaking world. So yung frame na to ni Fox, actually dalawa yung terms niya, no? Yung tinatawag nating lateral expansion and apical demotion. So I'll try to summarize this for our participants. To be clear, yung lateral expansion and apical demotion are, in the first instance, they are models of social differentiation, no? Or ways by which a group creates and defines distinctions among people themselves, no? Within the group. However, they have implications with regard to the nature of and the motivations behind the movement of peoples, and is connected to the theme that Bellwood opened about ideations and intentions of active agents. Though lateral expansion and apical demotion are different models of social differentiation, they are both based upon what Fox calls a widespread Austronesian notion that origins are a prime marker of social identity. So before going into the nitty-gritty of these two terms, let us look at what Fox outlined as what he calls a few key ideas about origins that recur throughout the Austronesian world. The first is that Austronesian origin narrative almost always posit multiple origins. No? So napansin niya na across the Austronesian-speaking world, kadalasan yung idea ng origins ay marami, more than one. No? This is in contrast to unitary origin stories that focus on singular instances of creation, perhaps what we're more familiar of sa Judeo-Christian tradition. Examples of such multiple origin stories are those that feature, for example, the destruction of a cosmic tree, or the separation of a primary couple, or among Filipinos, maybe a lot of us are familiar with yung origin story na yung may pamilya, tapos maraming anak, tapos nagalit yung tatay, tapos pinagalitan niya yung mga anak niya, and then his children all run off in different directions. And these children become the ascendants. Yung nagtago daw sa, yung nagtago sa room, naging chief. Those who hid in the walls became slaves. Those who ran outside became the freemen. Those who went off into the sea became the foreigners who come back later on, right? So multiple origins, and hence parang multiple peoples later on. According to Fox, this multiplicity of origins allows individuals to trace different ways of coming about, which forms the basis of social differentiation or the creation of internal distinctions between people. So the notion of multiple origins is a prime means of social differentiation. Okay. Fox cites here the Stranger Kings legend that are prevalent in the Pacific. No, I won't. Maybe we can talk about it later, but I'll skip that quickly. In predominantly Muslim areas, they may be figures of Muslim saints, or in Bali, they are Hindu priests. No? Stories that ascribe origins to heavenly beings also align with this theme of multiple origins. These create what Fox calls an enduring charter that is predicated on multiple origins and the perpetuation of different statuses. Based off of the differentiations that this produces, what Fox calls orders of precedence are assigned among different groups. So meron ka ng iba't ibang grupo, at between these groups, na bibigyan sila ng parang orders of precedence. No? And from then onwards, these internal divisions become significant and become reified. No? So that's yun yung nagiging basis by which the descendants from then on relate to each other. Okay. For Fox, origin accounts that reflect these sort of dynamics are what he calls paradigmatic and establish an Austronesian origin structure. No? So as exemplars, binanggit niya yung cases ng Kalauna of Goodenough Island, the Atatanaay of Flores Island, and the Ilongot of northern Philippines. Both the Kalauna and the Atatanaay divide themselves according to clans, who trace origins from different ancestors who arrive at their land through a series of successions and through different means. Orders of precedence are to be established in terms of birth order para sa kanila, no? So mas eminent, no? Mas may parang prior status yung older na mga anak, for example, than younger children kasi birth order. Each clan may have their own competencies, for example, in ritual or secret knowledge. And Fox repeats how these histories serve as the charter for the social structure. Okay, and this has implications in present relations. No, so I will concede to Fox, syempre, dun sa reading niya ng Kalauna tsaka Atatanaay. No, but I will return to his treatment of the Ilongot later on. Okay, so right. So based off of these key ideas of multiple origins and orders of precedence, there emerge two kinds of societies, or more strictly, two systems of social differentiation. No? So, dyan din papasok yung number one, lateral expansion, and number two, apical demotion. Basically, systems of lateral expansion are located in areas of the Austronesian world where movement took place among relatively large islands, where bilateral kinship, bilateral meaning yung kinship mo is both, you recognize both the father's side and the mother's side, no? Parang tayo, it's bilateral. Where bilateral kinship systems are more prominent. And the principal mode of social differentiation is age or birth order, where siblings could fission off and move away to found a new settlement. So in this way, lateral expansion is akin to Bellwood's proposal, where younger upstarts are incentivized to move away with the possibility of being able to found their own settlements and descent lines. Under lateral expansion, it is these memories of collective journeys that are emphasized in origin narratives. Systems of apical demotion, on the other hand, tend to be found in environments that are a bit more circumscribed, like smaller islands. Status is an important preoccupation, and elaborate narratives are mobilized to connect those belonging to higher status groups, clans, dynasties, etc., to origin stories of those ancestors who enjoy the most esteemed precedence, above any other ancestors who may come later. In such a more exclusivist arrangement, only one line or even one individual retains preeminent status, and others are demoted or lose status. Such systems of apical demotion are generally to be found in societies with royalty. Generally, societies with merong kings, rahas, sultans, and sacred chiefs. So, what kind of social relations that does apical demotion forge? Fox makes it clear that these demotive dynamics almost always extend only to members of the elite stratum and not to the population at large. So, among the elite, individuals and collectivities jockey for access to levels of higher precedence. Strategic marriage can be one way to do so, as well as through more aggressive means, such as what Fox calls predatory expulsion, or regularly expelling individuals, regularly making them go away, who may be a threat to the status quo. Origin narratives in these kinds of systems tend to focus on personages, and tracing genealogy becomes crucial. So Fox's twofold model of social differentiation reflects a twofold form of geographical expansion. Yung lateral expansion, first is lateral expansion, or the hiving off of social groups of equal status, and the predatory expulsion of ambitious upstarts who jockey for status in crowded social environments. Both kinds of movement depicted here are predicated on orders of precedence and the internal differentiations or divisions fostered by multiple origins. At sabi nga ni Fox na if you look at if you look across the Austronesian world, both kinds of mobility have been maximized by different Austronesian speaking societies. Right. Okay. So the last framework for mobility that I'll discuss today is James Scott's state evasion. Syempre, James Scott is well known for, among other books, yung book niya, The Art of Not Being Governed, which is a kind of like anarchic history of a vast swath of mainland Southeast Asia na yung tinatawag niya na Zomia na zone. I include Scott here for two reasons. Even if his work isn't exactly what one might immediately associate with yung mga Austronesian tropa. There was a time when he was influential in my own work, especially when he came out with this monograph on sago that Anna mentioned earlier. This monograph on sago and starch producing palms, where one of our arguments was about how the status of sago changed through history. From a staple food, it became a famine food or an escape food that sustained local populations who were resisting colonial incursions, especially in Mindanao. And that change of status, from staple to escape food, as pagkain siya ng mga pugante, probably contributed to its current marginalization as a food source and its low valuation and the low valuation of places where it's found, like sa mga marshes, at sa mga other marginal environmental areas like that. Okay. Second, and more broadly, is that Scott's historical view of state evasion is very much influential to anthropologists who study so-called anarchic societies that have developed forms of sociality that are, in certain crucial ways, diametrically opposed to a highly centralized and highly differentiated form of organization that we commonly call the state. These are societies that have high degrees of egalitarianism, they place premium on personal autonomy, and generally they have a peaceable ethos, no, in dealing with conflict. So I put this book up here as an exemplar, no, edited by Thomas Gibson and Kenneth Silander. This may be of interest to a lot of our participants here because they have a lot of studies based off on the Philippines rin. Sa Buid, sa Cuyunon, sa Palawan, tsaka sa ano. At meron din sila on Sama de Laot. No? So just for your reference. So such forms of sociality, yung anarchic, no, na sociality, developed out of an active resistance against adapting or being subsumed by far stronger external entities and aggressors like state actors. In this model, mobility was a crucial feature that accomplished a couple of ends. No? First, it prevented the formation of dominating institutions. It's an active act of opposition that set out these societies apart from those who sought to dominate them. Second, no, mobility allowed such societies to avoid having to deal with these institutions that have been established elsewhere. In the words of another anthropologist, Janet Hoskins, these peoples can be characterized as those who choose to flee violent encounters because they thought that they had little to gain and much to lose by retaliating. So these fleers have, one, high degrees of residential mobility or palipat-lipat ng tirahan. Two, they have interpersonal and kin relations that would be facilitative of quick dispersal. No? For example, nuclear families that can readily split off if they need to do so. Third, they also specialize living in and moving about locations that are extremely hard to access, like mountain ridges, marshlands, and even the open ocean. Okay. So Scott's model is a very elegant model, no, that really brings together history, politics, linguistics, ethnography. And you can see how influential it is across the varied social science disciplines, no, and its applicability in analyzing a diversity of topics and time periods. I mean, na-apply nga namin sa sago eh, di ba? Na-apply nga namin sa food. Hi, Ate Michelle, kung nandyan ka. Archaeology of food, no? However, this model relies upon a crucial premise, and that is the prior existence of states. No? So dapat meron ng estado na nakatayo doon. No? And these states should be proximate, no? Nearby to these smaller groups. These smaller groups then make a deliberate choice. No? Hence the term deliberately stateless peoples. But it is a choice that is in reaction to the domination that they experience at the hands of more robust and centralized powers. It is this reactive facet of the model that is worth re-examining, because it could posit that such choices, like leaving, dispersing, are always made in opposition to something. Having this frame all the time could make us lose sight of processes of decision-making that could be, and are, operative with or without a hegemonic enemy. It could also posit that for such groups, important features of ways of life are molded under duress, when we know that duress is not always the defining condition of their existence. So the anthropologist Charles MacDonald, who has done really good work rin sa Palawan, gave a very gentle, parang pagpuna, very gentle criticism to the stance of his anarchic colleagues. Talking about why people would choose to stay in isolated, inaccessible areas, Charles MacDonald said, if these people are where they are, it is probably because they prefer something rather than just refusing something supremely precious in their way of life, rather than something they dislike in others. No? So nakita niyo yung shift of emphasis. He further said that if he had to guess why people chose the way they did, he, quote, would vouch for a preference rather than a refusal. A statement that I appreciate much, because it locates agency back into internally significant valuations and categories. Okay, so what are the common assumptions of the three, just to summarize them. I think there's a crucial assumption that is common to them all. No? All three anchor their imagining of spatial movements in particular notions of inequality, whether you call it ranking or hierarchy or precedence, or of the presence of the state. This is starkly in contrast to the Pantaron Manobo. No? Kaya nga when I was reading it, I was like, this isn't resonating. Who are relatively egalitarian. They do not strongly feature internal ranking or precedence. And recent events notwithstanding, their social life is not completely defined by the logic of resistance to the state. My impression is that these ways of imagining motivations and actions are reflective of two issues that confront ethnographers and other scholars who draw from experience of traditional peoples. The first issue is that episodes of movement are given more weight or attention when they occur in the context of rivalries or when they occur in the higher stratum of a given society. The second issue is the ethnographic preoccupation with focusing on and identifying what it is that keeps people together, no? What coheres a group together. No? So parang meron din talagang preoccupation ang mga social anthropologists particularly in identifying what are the ideas or whatever the factors are that keeps people together, that makes them a group, no? And the ideas of origin and ancestors really serve that purpose well. In my view, among the Pantaron Manobo, cohering together is dialectically related with the potential to move apart, which we shall see is encoded in daily activities, ritual and oral tradition about the ancestors, and in a closer consideration of their local concept of panow. Okay, so before I completely jump into that, I mentioned earlier that I would get back to Fox's reading of Ilongot Society from yung description ni Michelle Rosaldo. No? So for anthropologists, you also have to read yung work ni Michelle Rosaldo, if I may suggest. No? So si Fox, hinanay niya yung Ilongot with the Kalauna and the Atatana Ay because of the presence of core groups and closely related families who share a history of moves. The slide that you see here, this is the portion of Rosaldo's book na kinote ni Fox, no? So makikita mo na merong idea ng core groups, closely related families who share a history of related moves. But when I read this, no, and the chapter wherein this description is located, I was reading it with an emphasis not on points of origin, no, but focusing on this so-called history of related moves that was crucially constitutive of these families and Ilongot notions of kinship. As such, I felt that the Ilongot view or experience, as documented by Rosaldo, resonated more with the Pantaron Manobo panow, the term that encapsulates various notions of geographical mobility, no? To live, to travel, to flee, to expand, and simply to go somewhere, which we have used as our point of departure in exploring local ways of living in and viewing the world. Okay, so yan. So doon na tayo talaga sa panow. No? And just to give you a quick introduction, the people that I work with, the Pantaron Manobo, no, they're usually called Ata Manobo in the literature. So if you're looking at the literature, you might encounter that term more often. No? But my interlocutors don't really like that term because they don't use it themselves. They don't call themselves Ata Manobo. They call themselves Manobo, but it's always in reference to a particular location. No? Most of the time, they refer to the river systems kung saan oriented yung villages nila. So if they live near the Salog River, they call themselves Mating Salog. If they live near the Talomo River, they call themselves Mating Talomo, etc., etc. And you can see on the map here yung parang medyo darker lines. These are the river systems that I'm talking about. So as you can see, malawak yung distribution nila. Asan ang Davao City dito? Ito, andito ang Davao City. No? So it crosses at least two, no? Provinces. Yeah, no, but even with this wide distribution, nagkakaintindihan sila ng wika, no? They understand each other's languages. And they share a lot of common material culture practices, such as tattooing, no, which I'm also studying, and epic chanting, no, which Michael is studying. And these river systems are linked through marriages and object transfers, which I'll talk about later on. No? And of course, no, in general, they are also linked by cooperative efforts. No? So given that situation, I call them the Pantaron Manobo, no? In reference to, of course, the Pantaron mountain range, which is their ancestral homeland. Okay, so how do we, and this is from the chapter, no, doon sa libro ni na Stephen Acabado. How do we approach panow? No? In our chapter in the reader and elsewhere, we approach panow here as a key category in a set of pointers or heuristic that link a cluster of terms which assemble like a Maussian system of total social facts or phenomena, no, or phenomenon social totoo. Kunwari marunong ako mag-Frances. Seems vintage, no? But without disavowing the colonial entanglements of this kind of approach, we follow the spirit of Zeus Salazar. Zeus Salazar's reassertion of the value of these anthropological tasks as a domain of study that is for ourselves, no? A domain that to pursue, no? Para sa atin. The intention is certainly not to fetishize a word, but to make it as an entry point in portraying what Strathern calls a gathered field of ethnographic realities, wherein the world plays back to people what they apprehended about it through the supports it gives to their ideas. No? So it's sort of like the anthropologist trying to enter an echo chamber, no? And listening to the resonances within. So what are these resonances when the Pantaron Manobo talk about panow? Panow as repeated mobilities within a defined space can also, in the sense, describe a land or a world where one belongs to. And this captures the Manobo sense of sociality. When one is in the highlands of the Pantaron, the idea of a series of walking to and fro and building a world, no, is the proper counterpoint to what we might call the imagined community after Anderson. These series of walking to and fro occur as everyday mobilities. No? In their economic life, this is reflected in their primary way of making a living, which is through Sweden farming, no? Or shifting agriculture, and for men, hunting. This in turn is related to residential mobility, no? Yung palipat-lipat ng tirahan. For example, one of the village where a lot of my interlocutors come from, they've transferred 4 times, no, in the past roughly 10 years, no. So that's kind of like every 2 or 3 years, no, they would transfer their settlement, no. But still, actually within the limits of what they yung named, no, na village area nila. Partly related to making a living is the Manobo practice of panumbaloy or visiting, no, pagbisita. And these visits are not just to the next village over, hindi lang siya parang you hop to the next village, but these could be visits to the next river system over, no, that we saw in the map earlier. And these visits can also go on for indefinite periods of time. Madalas na nangyayari dati nung nakakapag-field pa kami na pupunta kami sa isang village and we'd be looking for somebody and they said, oh, he's off on a panumbaloy, and like, oh, when is he coming back? Oh, we don't know. You know, so it's ganon, no? Ganon ka dynamic. And even in their internally displaced state, no, for example, sa Haran, sa Davao City, yung arrangement kasi doon ng tirahan nila is parang merong mga hahabang mga longhouse per village, no? So every day, like for example, we're walking around and seeing how everybody's doing, and we'd see like an interlocutor at the longhouse of another village, and like, hey, that's anong ginagawa mo dyan, no? And they say, we're just, you know, sitting, panumbaloy mi, anak. No? So this is still a vibrant notion, no? Even in the evacuation center. Marriage is likewise marked by mobility by a series of visits. No? So kahit yung institution ng pagpapakasal, no? It's marked by a series of visits or transfers of people throughout the marriage process. The first, of course, is the transfer of the groom to the residence of the bride kasi they're matrilocal. No? So the groom comes in to live with the bride's family. No? And then after a few days, he goes home to his natal home or natal village for a visit called paulit gimukod, which literally means letting the image come home. And then after that, there's another visit called pamanoik, or to climb up, which is a visit done by both the bride and the groom to the groom's place. No? So from yung kanilang primary residence sa bahay ng babae, bibisita sila doon sa bahay ng lalaki. So, and all of these back and forth movements are also occasions for gift giving from both sides. What these visits signal is that marriage relations between bride and groom and in-laws are established and strengthened as much as through movement, journeying, and relocating themselves as with giving of gifts and bride wealth. Another important dimension of mobility are object transfers called tamok. Now, we don't call them exchanges because they're not formally exchanges, but they're simply objects transfer from one party to another. At its core, tamok can be compared to what Maus describes as gift prestations, but with a crucial difference. In the Pantaron, the spirit of obligation to give, receive, and reciprocate is not initiated by the giver, no, but by the party who asks for help. This practice, mediated by the datu, through time, it assumes a complex web of inter-village tamok obligations and relations across the Pantaron highlands. Okay, so as people who do these panumbaloy, this marriage, these tamok practices, from scales to small villages to super level villages, and going beyond river systems, no, say yung Talomo, Salog, between these that you see on the map. Movement through space is part and parcel of existence, no. So sa madaling sabi, sanay, no, sanay sa movement through space as opposed to a very sedentary life. These practices facilitate the visualization of a wide expanse of areas where one can forge links in or leave behind, no, depending upon the circumstances. And this visualization gains a well-founded form through Manobo oral tradition. No? Both the hours-long poetry chanting called the olaging and the briefer prose rendering they call gungutan. No? So may dalawang parang genre, no, I suppose, no, of oral tradition. The olaging, which is really epic, and gungutan, which is shorter and more told in a conversational way. No? So I put up here a book by a local scholar in Davao, si Rolando Bajo, which also has a may mga compilations na siya ng mga oral traditions. And at the same time, even in our ethnographic work, yung olaging tsaka gungutan, yung tinatawag talaga ng mga Manobo na kasaysayan nila, no? So, for example, no, magpa-istorya ka sa dato na parang dato, ano yung kasaysayan ninyo, no? And actually sila rin sinasabi nila na parang, you want to learn about yung kasaysayan namin, ito yung kasaysayan namin. Else dinadaan nila sa pamamagitan ng olaging, no, tsaka gungutan. Right. Such olaging and gungutan almost carry the similar theme of movement, almost all of them, no? Carry the theme of movement through space, almost always carried out by these three named heroes, no? Si Tulalang, si Banlac, tsaka si Agyo. At kadalasan sila rin ay magkakapatid. Okay. Ay, tsaka si Manoloran din pala. Okay. So yan, may mga names sila, no? So parang if we're going to treat them as ancestral figures, no, they're named ancestral figures, and they're consistent, no, across this entire area. Okay, and they belong to different communities kasi they married into different communities. No? Kung matrilocal, di doon sila sa village nung wife nila tumitira. Such stories depict in a typically heroic style yung mga Manobo pursuits such as hunting, finding a spouse, dealing with spirit guides, and waging battles. More importantly, the social links formed through such interactions result in coordinated movements across named geographical locations. No? So makikita mo talaga na nagta-travel sila. No? Travel, punta doon, punta dito, back and forth. No? And towards the story's conclusions, kadalasan, these stories conclude with journeys into the heaven, no? Or journeys to the land where there is no death, sinasabi nila. Across these collected accounts, there are no traces or indications of notions of ranking or precedence. No? These are really only just a band of free-thinking brothers who are free to decide whether they would come or not. No? They'd literally be like, hey, brother, I'm off. Are you coming with me? And then sasabihin ng brother, parang, habol na lang ako kasi I need to work pa here. No? So mga ganun na mga klase ng mga exchanges. This in epic form, I think, aligns with the history with the so-called, no, sinabi ni Rosaldo na, history of related moves of closely related families that she astutely noted among the Ilongot, but without the notions of one core group being more precedent over another. Okay. Right. Now, one may think that these depictions of social relations are only confined to stories or told for entertainment or just a simple literature. But these notions of mobility coalesce under the formal institution of pag-ugpo, or a ritual conducted during times of extreme crisis, wherein one or more villages gather together to wait for the baton or the journey to the land where there is no death. Okay, so yun pangalan ng journey, no, baton. Pag-ugpo literally means to stay put or to stay in the house. And this is what pag-ugpo participants do. They stay at a ritual house called a panubaran. They gather there every morning at the break of dawn because that's when the spirits can see you. No? And if the spirits saw fit, they would take the villagers into baton. Afternoons, and if that doesn't happen at the break of dawn, afternoons and evenings are given to tasks and relaxation and epic chanting for entertainment. This routine is supposed to boost their morale, and indeed, this time is recalled as one with a heightened sense of anticipation that the journey of the baton is about to happen. What is the Manobo idea of what is supposed to happen at the end of pag-ugpo? No? So, hindi ito parang murky, abstract na parang pagtingin. Kasi sa epic mismo nila, for example, sa epic ng Man Oloron, it ends with a salimbal, which is a vessel, that comes down from the heavens, that's tethered on a rope, nakatali siya sa tali. No? And this salimbal, no, swings around across the different river systems, collecting the kinspeople of Man Oloron. No? And interestingly enough, for those who are excited about stuff like this, the salimbal is described as a house. No? Okay. So yun, no? So yung idea is that everybody goes off together. No? I think that's the parang durable image that the Manobo think about when they think about this journey to the land where there is no death. As an institution of panow, pag-ugpo can be taken as a movement of the whole. No? The movement of the whole, the living aspect, the fleeting moment when Pantaron communities take full sensory consciousness of themselves and their situations, sensu maus, no? And this happens during a state of grave anxieties. It also plays, it also plays off of the dialectical tension of staying put, no, and moving away, because contemporary episodes of pag-ugpo end by these communities remaining where they are, no? Kasi syempre walang baton na nagaganap, no? But nevertheless, they had gone through that experience of tensely, no, envisioning yung leaving, no. Ayan, no. So and this palpable sense of excitement about leaving, you see this, no, in other ethnographic realities among the Pantaron, no. So parang ito yung mga nagre-resonate among them. Just to give you an ethnographic vignette, there was a time when our friends would kinukulit nila kami na meron silang gustong panoorin na pelikula. Tapos and they were like, sir, ma'am, ganito yung pelikula. They were describing it. They were describing it as yung mga bida daw ay mga lumad. Tapos, na inaapi, no? So, dinedescribe nila and they said na parang, meron din silang mga tattoo kagaya namin, no? So, may ganung parang affinity silang naramdaman. And then they couldn't remember the title of the film, but they remembered the plot and they remembered yung characters. Finally, we found out what it was, and it's Warriors of the Rainbow. And a bit of a spoiler alert, yung ending ng Warriors of the Rainbow actually ends like a journey to the land where there is no death. Okay? And pinalabas namin to twice kasama nila sa Buckwheat, and both times makita mo talaga yung jump pack, blockbuster. So makita mo talaga yung excitement, and then makita mo talaga na parang at the moments of, syempre, of heightened drama, no, nagre-resonate sa kanila, no, particularly the concluding portion that ends with a journey, right? Okay. So and yun, and even at the individual level, there's always a frisson of excitement when Pantaron Manobo talk about laag, no, when they talk about their journeys when they were younger, no, when they were single. It's always a joy to just go off, no, like parang I asked this friend of mine na parang, how did your parents meet? And she said that her father just went off kasi laagan yung tatay niya, no. What's laag? What's laagan in Taga? I don't know how to speak Tagalog anymore.
Laagan yung mahilig lakwatsero.
Correct, ganun. Okay. So naglakwatsa lang yung tatay niya, umalis. And then that's how he met his wife, no? His future wife. So you have all of these stories. Doubtless may gender dimension to, no, but I won't get into that later on na lang. But there's always that excitement of the potential of going off, no? Okay, so we see that in the institution of pag-ugpo. We see that in the lived realities of individuals and in their personal histories. Okay, right. Okay, by way of a conclusion, at this point, I'd just like to reiterate an important methodological point as a conclusion. No? First is that this whole exercise of unpacking panow has driven the point that beyond simply invoking a local term or a local category, they should be demonstrated as a palpable entry point, constitutive of a gathered field of sociological realities. No, so I think a lot of Philippine study scholars are fond of looking for terms and using them as entryways. That in principle, syempre maganda yan, but you really do have to demonstrate that it is a gathered field. You can't just get a random term and then say na parang, oh, this is it. This is what captures their, yung kultura nila, no, or yung way of life nila. At the minimum, panow as a lived idea and pag-ugpo as a sociological practice, no, so they're paired, serves as a tight example of how a category centered of moving in space is linked to an actual ritual or institution. So the institution of pag-ugpo and the wider notion of panow gives us an idea of how the Pantaron Manobo fosters the desire for the desire for, and the excitement of going away, but without sacrificing their durable form of sociality, wherein no core group or settlement can claim precedence over others. No? So as in the ending of the Man-Oloron epic, everybody goes. Everybody goes off on a journey. Okay. Right. So What does Pantaron Panow add, no, or say to the three frames that we discussed earlier in the first half? It can be taken as a model that A connects with Bellwood's underlining of the ideological component of mobility, but B also one that drops the constraining assumption of social differentiation for spatial mobility, but without banning it, if it is warranted by the data. And so C, this opens the importance of free expansion as a result of gradual everyday mobilities and even wanderlust or the sheer excitement of exploring other worlds. No? And these worlds can include the visualized land of no death, no, that is intensely imagined during the pag-upo. Or at the present moment, these can also be the realms of their novel engagements and the possibilities they encounter in Manila, in the Bakwit, and in their schools. And so at that point, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Aya. That was a very wonderful, excellent talk. I really liked it. Before anything else, I want to introduce and to tell everyone that if you have any questions, you can put it on the chat, or you can, if you're shy, or you can actually raise your hand if you have any questions. If you're shy, you can direct message Arturo, JJ. His username is Arturo here. He is my co-moderator of this talk. And also, I would also like to, but before everything else, I want to ask Aya and to tell everyone that this is a very good talk, and this is something that I also want to show that this had a really good, this is a very good idea on what a lot of people are already working with. All right. Okay. First of all, okay, before everything else, for the word panow, I was surprised as well because when I wasn't reading your slides, honestly, I was listening to you and taking down notes. And when you were mentioning panow, ang unang rinig ko is panow in Bisaya, isn't it deaf?
Yes, that's what that's what I first thought of, Ren, kasi sa Tagalog din, 'di ba? Ang panow
yes.
is panow's
Yes.
that actually slight phonemic difference, I guess, no? Kasi
Yes.
sa Tagalog, I guess it's panaw with an A, right?
Yes.
Pero Manobo, ang transformation niya is panow.
Panow.
So we spell it with an O. It has no association with death. Yung pano, no?
Sorry, it has no?
It has no, it's not associated with death as directly in the way that it is in Tagalog or in Bisaya.
Okay. So but then it can also be traced. I was also thinking that if we start to look at it in a more generalized way, then we can also look at it in terms of travel, as you were also suggesting in your talk. Because I've also listened to some mga travels. I think may kausap ako dito. Baka si Michael yung kausap ko dito. yung when I was listening to some ethnographies and some documentaries, when a lot of people talk about somebody who already died or passed away, some of them will not, they call it leaving. So nagta-travel na sila, or they get on a parang lumayag na siya. So by layag, they get on or nagpalaot. They went to the sea. They went to the river. So it always has a connotation with travel, and I think that's a very good connection.
I have no doubt na connected sila, no. Pero syempre it remains to be unpacked. But yes. I think it's a solid hypothesis.
Yes.
To stand on.
Yeah. I have other questions, but I'm sure there's other questions from other people. I'm sure. I will call on JJ to.
Yes. So I'll be moderating the Q&A session.
Yes.
Following the talk. So yes, if anyone has any questions, feel free to use the raise hand function, unmute yourself, and if you'd like to also show your video, or you could type in your questions in the chat directly to everyone so everyone can read. Or if you're a little shy, you could direct message Anna or myself, and we could ask the questions directly. So if anyone has any questions, now is the time to ask them. Hold on. If
I think there might be some questions. Oh, from John.
yes, from John Abad. He says, "Hi, thanks for the talk. They had heroes. How about villains or cautionary tales?"
Okay. Okay. Good. Exactly. Good question. I think that when we ask a question na parang meron ba silang vida o kaya kontra vida, it's kind of grounded in our own moral system, 'di ba? Kasi syempre pag may fairy tale, alam mo na yung bida siya yung good, yung kontrabida siya yung bad. This is another thing that Michael and I have been thinking about for ages, because yung so-called moral na framework na ganun, we think differs slightly among the Pantaron Manobo, no? In the sense na hindi siya directly good or bad, no? Meron silang mga tinatawag na mga diliingon ato, no? Or beings that are not like us, that can be considered bad, no? They call it by different names, pero yung pinaka-common na term sa kanila is busaw, no? So when you hear stories about busaw, the busaw figure there can be the malevolent figure. It can be the contra vida figure, no? Pero hindi lang yun yung kapakahulugan kasi ng busaw eh. In a lot of other ways, busaw simply means a great power, no? Parang gahum, no, kung sa Bisaya pa. Parang power siya na overwhelming. At dahil overwhelming siya, doon pwede nang gagaling yung takot, no, na nararamdaman ng tao when confronted with that strong force, no, or with that strong power, no. So that's why no, kung mabilisan na usapin, kung for short and in quick conversations, they would say na probably na yung busaw yan yung bad, no, maunang lain kung sa Bisaya. Pero it's not as clearly dichotomized and as clearly clear cut as based on our own notions of morality.
Kumbaga,
so if you look at the stories,
sorry, parang kumbaga humans being humans. People being people.
Pwedeng ganun eh. Pwedeng ganun na parang in the same way na parang wala ka namang taong masasabi na clearly bad or clearly good, no? Parang pwedeng ganung klaseng pagtingin. If you look at yung mga epics naman, minsan there are versions of the epics where clearly this is like the bida in the sense na parang hala, siya talaga yung parang mananalo, gano'n, in whatever match. Tapos ito yung matatalo. Pero may other versions naman na baliktad, no? Na ito naman yung mananalo, ito naman yung matatalo, no? So so parang ganun siya. Hindi siya parang in the Western tradition na merong princess tas merong witch, ganun. Hindi siya ganun. Okay. So I hope I answered John's question.
Okay, there's another question here by BB Monkey. It says, "Hello, Maya. Interesting talk. So the duality of good versus evil is not emphasized. So how do they usually make sense of morality or their world? Like maayo o dili maayo. Or how about life and death? How do they philosophize about death?"
Dito ka.
Gusto mo na isama yung camera. Dalaw.
Dito si Michael eh. So join daw siya sa
Iimbitahin rin namin yan.
Q&A. What do you think?
Bakit kailangan ba?
Yung pag-iisip tungkol sa pag-philosophize tungkol sa death.
I guess interesting rin yun kasi a lot of people will, especially as archaeologists, doon namin mostly tinitignan yung material culture in the end and how it will be shown. Kasi yun yung magiging final material mo eh. So how to philosophize death? Of course, we already understand that when we philosophize death, or when we look at the death materials, then we should also look at the concept of life. We're not just looking at death.
Right, absolutely.
Siyempre mahabang lecture siguro yan kung about philosophy of death. Pero dalawa yung nabanggit dito, di ba? Yung isa is yung morality ng good and evil. Separate yon sa idea nung kung ano ang pag-isip sa kamatayan. Well, to cut it short, pwedeng isipin na sa totoo lang, walang idea talaga ng death. No? At least feeling ko sa mga Austronesian, they just continue going on to different worlds. They're just a kind of a cut from this world to the other world. But technically, tuloy-tuloy lang yung goinawa, yung breath na to keep on moving, no? Pero siyempre isang mahabang pag-aaral dahil mahalawak, very very broad topic yung filosofiya ng kamatayan. Pero siguro nakapaloob talaga yon sa notion ng panaw, tsaka sa pag-ugpo at pag-move to other worlds. Kaya malaking bahagi diyan yung pag-isip kung ano ang buhay. Anong notion ng life?
Wait lang, oh my God. I was thinking of something and then I forgot. Wait, what was I thinking of? Okay. Kasi when my interlocutors speak about the land with no death, oo nga no, that good question because it made me think. When they talk about the land with no death, ang pag-describe pa nila nung situation na yun, nung state na yun, it's actually parang it's a state, no? Wherein hindi ka na nagugutom, hindi ka na nahihirapan, hindi ka na in the present context, no? Hindi ka na parang hinahound ng mga kaaway mo, ng estado, no? So it's not a kagaya ng nga na sinabi ni Maifel na parang it's just simply transitioning into a state wherein hindi ka nakakaranas ng paghihirap, no? Now I would prefer to interpret yung ganong statements, no, from within yung context nila rather than try to say na parang it's similar to the Judeo-Christian tradition or anything like that. I would think that yung visualization mo of the land where is no death, I think we have to look at it as kind of partly contingent on what they're going through at the moment. Kaya na-describe nila yun in that way. No?
And it can also be, I was also thinking that it can be associated dun sa the lack of, siguro ito yung state of lack of certain pressures or may duress.
Yeah,
I think Edwin Valientes wrote about sa thesis niya where the Anitos are also, but this is in Batanes of course, that the Anitos experience everything as the living do. So they still plant, they can do everything as humans do. But since he never talked about yung concept na may duress, only just the concept of death as travel. So interesado ako to see that this is with an introduction of environmental or psychological or I don't know, some other concepts of duress rin na pumapasok.
Parang mga follower ng para silang katulad ng sinabi ni Spinoza. Wala talagang kamatayan. Wala talagang kamatayan. Di ba may philosopher na si Baruch Spinoza? Sabi niya, huwag kayong maniwala dyan. Wala talagang kamatayan. Just go on. So, long before Spinoza, meron ng mga Austronesian na nagsasabi na you just keep on going to other worlds. There's no death.
You go to the mountains, you go to the under the land, under the house, upriver. Good point yun ah. Okay, I'm sorry. Baka si JJ, I think there are other questions.
Yes, there are other questions. So this next question is by Albert Santos, and if I could get Anna quickly to help me read it, because I'm a little shy on my Tagalog. Anna, you're muted.
Yeah, I think I can wait.
Yeah, we'll read it out for the recording. So, hi, Ma'am Aya and Sir Michael. Good to see you. Tanong ko lang kung may nakikita kayo na relasyon sa konsepto ng panaw sa pangatoed na mga Pantaron Manobo. So if there's a relationship between the concept of panaw and pangatoed.
Okay. Meron, Albert. Si Albert is was my student in UP Min, and he's now with Ateneo de Davao.
Teacher.
Yeah, he's with Ateneo de Davao as faculty, as my peer. All right. Albert, meron. Yung pangotob is yung tattooing, no, ng Manobo. So that's a local term for the tattooing. One of the most common reasons, kung tanungin mo sila, one of the most common reasons na sasabihin nila kung bakit sila nagpapatattoo is that they are not eaten by the Ologasi. No? What is the Ologasi? The Ologasi is a mythical figure. It's actually a busaw, no? It's a mythical figure. It's a giant. Yeah, it's a giant. Higante, no? Ang storya. At yung Ologasi is in the stories, no, doon sa mga olaging tsaka sa mga gungutan na sinabi ko kanina. Yung Ologasi, nagbabantay siya doon sa portal to the land where there is no death. Okay, so the land where there is no death, there is a portal, and you have to go through the Ologasi before you can go through. And in the stories, when the hero and his community they approach that portal, sasabihin ng Ologasi sa kanila na I won't let you through unless you leave me somebody from your group. Okay, and that somebody from their group is always yung sister nung hero. Okay, so iiwan yung babae with the Ologasi, and then the rest of the group can go through. Now, I'm very, very reluctant to analyze that in terms of like merong sacrifice, may idea ng sacrifice ng babae, etc., etc. Because yung relationship that is forged between the Ologasi and the woman is they actually get married, no? And it's actually parang, and then there are other stories that show na yung marriage na yan actually creates links between the hero's community and the Ologasi, no? So may kinship na sila. Okay. No. But be that as it may, yung tattooing, no, is a parang a constant visual and embodied reminder of that parang, shall we say, historical memory, no, collective memory nila told through these stories. So in that sense, oo, may kinalaman yung tattooing sa panaw kasi that's the story that is recalled through the tattooing. No, at least that's one story that's recalled through the tattooing. So yeah.
I like that, and the concept of kinship, which is also something that we like to think about sa archaeology, I guess. Pero in Philippine archaeology, halos hindi pa siya, besides the historical, but studies, hindi pa siya masyado na-emphasize. And I think it's time if you look at the
I think one of the things that archaeologists also have to be conscious about is that yung categories natin ng kinship tayo today. Yung categories natin ng kinship may not be the same. Wow, ang daming pwede pag-usapan. There's the if you notice yung kahit yung mga sinite ni na facts tsaka ni Bellwood na mga storya, no, there's always this emphasis on siblings, right? So parang within one generation, no, yung may emphasis sa mga ganung klaseng relationships. What else? In the Manobo, of course, we see that kasi it's always these brothers, no, who na tinatampok, no, sa mga storya, no. So as an archaeologist, I guess you have to be aware of those parang different ways of reckoning kinship.
Yes.
Yeah, before or in the process rather,
And at least
interpreting the material culture.
Yeah. And I was also thinking about this kasi I guess yung pinag-usapan natin, matagal ko na siyang iniisip rin sa burials and jar burials with multiple burials. Immediately people will think kinship associations. And that's also yun rin yung minention ni Hokano in his when he interviewed some people in Iloilo about their jar burials. All the bones will have to be of the siblings have to be put in one jar until finally all the siblings in one line died, tapos ilalagay na sila sa final resting place. So I guess yun yung iniisip ko na in terms of burying, the siblings is also highly emphasized. But in terms of kinship, you can also have you also talked about this earlier, some hindi naman necessary about sa hindi naman tayo naka-focus, or Bellwood also hindi naman tayo talagang yung pagkasunod-sunuran, the blood, yung blood relations. It can also be associated with formed relationships. That's still an important kinship relationship.
I'll give you another parang quick example, no. Sa Manobo, they have this term called sulod. And it refers to both yung actual mo na kapatid tsaka mga pinsan.
Okay.
No? So and there were a lot of times wherein, as an anthropologist, gumagawa kami ng genealogical tree. There was a lot of confusion that was caused by because they use the same word, no? They can use the same word for kapatid and pinsan, no? So may ganon, no? So meaning conceptually, hindi nila hinihiwalay yung kapatid sa pinsan. Kahit na sa atin, isang sibling set siya, kahit na sa atin, clearly hiwalay siya, di ba?
Yes.
So may mga things that we need to that we need to re-examine, yung mga assumptions natin.
I really like that.
Yes, okay. Yes, it's very interesting, and especially the terms. It sort of seems like other Austronesian languages have that same sort of phenomenon. The first thing that comes to mind is Hawaiian, where everyone within the same same generation share like common common terms, and that's really interesting. Yeah, thank you for that really interesting answer. But on to the next question. So Marianne Reyes asked, for researchers wanting to go to the field, hold on, let me read that. For researchers wanting to go to the field to live and learn with Pantaron Manobos, what best practices and challenges can you share given the notion of mobility?
Okay. Depende, no? Marian, depends on what you want to learn, no? Syempre, if you go to their community, meron ng mga there are villages that you can stay at, no? And if it depends, no, kung ano yung research topic mo. One thing that we have noticed in the past few years is that parang anecdotally, no, off the top of my head, I would say na nagkakaroon na ng trend towards yung permanence, no, ng mga villages na ito, especially after the building of schools, no, yung mga lumad schools na iniistorya natin. Nung nagkakaroon dun sa mga villages na natatayuan ng eskwelahan, no, I would say that it's noticeable na medyo mas nagiging permanent sila at lumalaki sila, no? So hindi malayo, if that trend had continued, hindi malayong isipin na magpa-permanent na yung mga villages, no, around the school. So in that sense, pwedeng again, if that situation had continued, in that sense, hindi na siguro masyadong common yung palipat-lipat ng tirahan. Pero if pero yung mga tao pwedeng mag-move pa rin. No? Merong mga, tsaka meron silang, they have this term for a person who just wants to move away and build their own house by themselves. Na tahadagon. The term is tahadagon. Dag kasi, yung root word nun is dag. Dag is an isolated na tirahan, no? That you build away from the main settlement, no? So may ganun ding parang individual na desire to just go, no? So yun, if you wanna look at that phenomenon, di syempre you'll have to you have to focus on people who are matigdag, no, or tadagon. No? Matig kasi is tagadag, eh. And tadagon is somebody who tends to dag.
Parang
right?
loner.
Grabe!
I was also going to ask rin what is the general or idea on that person? Parang generally may asawa ba siya or may babalikan ba siya? Ganun ba?
Okay. Yes. Wala akong kilalang adult na Manobo at the moment. Wala akong kilalang adult na Manobo na walang asawa. Except si Bay Bibiaon. Diba? Literally. Except si Bay Bibiaon Bigkay, no? Yung kilala natin na woman leader. So yes, I would say that people, they have spouses. In fact, si Bay Bibiaon, ang storya niya sa buhay niya is, yung tatay niya actually was a tadagon, no? Somebody who preferred to be by himself. It was actually her mother who was yung sociable, no? Doon si Bay Bibiaon, sa nanay niya siya nagmana na sociable, who talks to people, who settled conflict, who stayed in the settlement, no? So yeah, it's possible to be that, yun sa question ni Anna.
Okay, thank you. For time, we'll call for the last question and then we'll officially end this BINALOT talk. So yeah, if anyone has any last questions they want to ask, that would be the time.
I think there's one last question
Yes.
from username BB Monkey.
Yes.
I'll read it na lang, JJ.
Yes. Thank
So
you.
magkakaroon din ba ng archaeology and the emerging Mindanaon?
I will leave that to the archaeologists and the anthropologists who will come after me. No? I would love to see that happen. I don't know if I can. There's so much to do, so little time. But I would love for that to happen, and I look forward to yung mga sina Albert ay nagtawag no, yung mga junior colleagues ko, yung mga former students ko. I would be very happy and I would encourage you guys to go and do that.
I think rin naman the emerging Mindanaon is continuing, and that's why there's a lot of people na including you and Michael and all your first students are still contributing to that. And hindi naman siya mag-stop rin, kaya patuloy pa rin ang pag-redefine ng konseptong Mindanao. And I guess pati rin siguro, pwede rin natin itong i-refer dun sa past. Dahil kung ano man yung research natin sa Mindanao right now, in the future baka mali pala yung, or iba pala, may iba ng pananaw sa ganong klaseng mga ideya. So pwedeng patuloy na magbabago ang mga konseptong ito. Ang maganda na lang sana talagang sama-sama tayong mag-contribute dito.
Of course, oo.
Transfer na lang si Ana sa Mindanao.
Kung re-recruit. Recruitment.
Pwede lang. Sabihan nyo lang ako.
Yeah, so dati parang a few months ago I talked about archaeology in Mindanao tsaka yung mga potentials, no. There is an accumulating body of work, and Anna is one of them who is contributing to that accumulating body of work, no. Pero just like in any social science, kailangan pa ng manpower, no. Kailangan pa ng people who are committed, and there's a lot of space, huge space, no? Research, paglinang ng konsepto.
And
ang pinaka-importante na gawin pa is yung link between Mindanao tsaka Sulawesi.
Malapit na tayo.
Halmahera. Oo.
Oo.
Para tayo hiwalay from Eastern Indonesia.
Oo
So
nga.
tama yung mga panawagan talaga ni Zeus na kailangang sustained yung linkage kasi parang sarili lang tayo Pilipinas from the rest ng Eastern Indonesia.
So for next week, charot. For next month.
Well, actually, I guess it's time for us to end the BINALOT talk. But if you can stay, because I actually have some questions pa. And dahil nandito pa na si Maifel, who opened up that question about Indonesia, then and that concept of Indonesia, I want to, habang nandyan siya, I will ask na, if it's okay. Ayun. And I think there are other people who want to also ask questions, but for the sake of, because this is being recorded and baka
no
kami ng YouTube, we will stop recording and then we will continue with the discussion. So, but to everyone else who are here, thank you so much for coming to BINALOT Talk. If you want to ask more questions but you were shy dahil i-upload namin ito sa YouTube, just then we invite you to stay on. I think Aya and Michael still have some time to answer some more questions. Sabihin nyo na lang kami na ano na kayo, na pagod na kayo dahil alas 5 yata kayo gumising, girl.
Okay lang. Hindi naman halata.
Oo nga naman. Chos. Sige. Everyone, thank you so much and see you for the next BINALOT. Our next talk will be by Professor Lagman from Geography. Let me pull up the title because I always forget to see. Oh, okay. The Colonial State and the Regulation of Dangerous, Dirty, and Disturbing Women in 19th Century Manila. So that will be the topic for next week. We hope that you can come by again and listen to the talk. So thank you to JJ for helping with moderating. Thank you, very big thank you to Ara Espigar who helped this out, and to everyone from ASP and from UP Mindanao and everyone else. Thank you for coming to the BINALOT Talks and good afternoon. Okay.